In 2007, a man in Salt Lake City was told he was breaking the law. He had not stolen anything. He had not trespassed. He had not polluted a river or a well. His crime was this. He had installed a barrel under his downspout to catch rainwater falling from his own roof onto his own property. The state of Utah informed him that under a 120-year-old water rights law, the rain that fell on his house did not actually belong to him. It belonged to someone else, someone downstream, someone he had never met. And collecting that rain in a barrel was, technically, theft. He was not alone. Across Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and parts of other western states, millions of Americans were living under laws that made it illegal to catch rain in a bucket. In Colorado, the law dated back to 1889. For 127 years, every drop of water that fell from the sky was legally the property of the prior appropriation holders downstream. You could not store it, you could not divert it, you could not build a tank to hold it. In some counties, a homeowner with a simple rain barrel could be fined hundreds of dollars. The laws have been partially relaxed since 2016. Colorado now allows 110 gallons. Utah allows 2,500 gallons with registration, but the underlying principle remains. In several states, the water that falls freely from the sky onto your own land is not freely yours. And in the states where it is legal, the water companies and building code enforcement have found other ways to make storage difficult. Prefabricated cisterns cost $3,000 to $10,000. Plastic tanks crack and leach chemicals. Concrete poured tanks require specialized contractors and heavy equipment. The message is consistent across decades. If you want to store water, pay someone unless you know about ferrocement. A 10,000-liter water tank, built by hand, using chicken wire, cement, sand, and water. Total material cost under $500. Lifespan over 50 years. The technology is 177 years old. It was invented by a French gardener. It was perfected by an Italian engineer who used it to build sports stadiums, and a 100-meter span exhibition hall in Turin that still stands today, and yet most Americans have never heard of it. The year is 1848, Paris, France. A man named Joseph Louis Lambaut is working in his workshop on an unusual project. Lambaut is a lawyer and landowner, not an engineer, but he has an obsession. He wants to build something out of concrete that has never been built before. Specifically, he wants to build a boat. At this point in history, concrete has been used in construction for centuries, going back to the Romans. But concrete alone is brittle. It resists compression, meaning you can pile enormous weight on top of it without it cracking. But it fails instantly under tension, meaning any attempt to flex it or pull it apart causes it to shatter. For this reason, concrete is used for things that sit still and bear weight, like foundations and columns. It is not used for things that need to be thin, flexible, or structurally complex. Lambaut suspects this limitation can be overcome. He takes iron wire and weaves it into a mesh, shaping the mesh into the form of a small boat. Then he coats the mesh with a thin layer of cement mortar, pressing it into every gap in the wire and smoothing it on both sides. The iron handles the tension, the cement handles the compression. Together they create a composite material stronger than either component alone. In 1848, his finished boat floats, a boat made of wire and cement, not a model, a real boat that a man can sit in. Lambaut patents the material in Belgium and later exhibits the boat at the 1855 Exposition Universelle in Paris, where visitors stare at it in disbelief. He calls the material ferrocement, iron cement. The invention is not widely adopted. Lambaut is a lawyer, not a manufacturer. His patent is limited to Belgium. The industrial world is preoccupied with steam engines and railways. The wire-reinforced cement boat is seen as a curiosity, a magic trick, nothing more. But a young French gardener named Joseph Monnier saw it. Monnier runs a landscaping business in Paris. He grows ornamental plants for wealthy clients and is constantly frustrated by one problem. The ceramic pots and planters used in upscale gardens are fragile, heavy, and expensive. A large ceramic planter costs a fortune and breaks if you look at it sideways. Monnier begins experimenting in his workshop. He takes iron wire mesh, shapes it into the form of a planter, and coats it with cement mortar. The result is a planter that weighs half as much as ceramic, costs a fraction as much, and does not break when dropped. On July 16, 1867, Monnier files his first patent. He calls it iron-reinforced concrete. He is granted rights to manufacture urns, planters, troughs, and most importantly, cisterns, water tanks. By 1875, he has expanded his patent to include bridges, building one of the first steel-reinforced concrete bridges in history. The exterior was sculpted to look like rustic timber logs, an early example of decorative concrete mimicking natural materials. Monnier's invention spreads across Europe quickly. Farmers, estate owners, and municipal water authorities begin using ferrocement to build water storage tanks on a massive scale. The tanks hold thousands of liters. They resist freezing and thawing. They do not rust like steel tanks. They do not rot like wooden tanks. They do not leach chemicals like early plastics. And they cost a fraction of what ceramic or cast iron alternatives would cost. Then, in the early 20th century, an Italian engineer named Pierluigi Nervi picked up where Monnier left off. Nervi was not interested in water tanks. He was interested in monumental architecture. In 1940, during the Second World War, Nervi patented a refined version of the material he called ferrocemento. He used thinner cement mortar over finer wire mesh and discovered that the resulting panels could be curved, shaped, and prefabricated. He discovered structural forms previously impossible with traditional concrete. In 1948, Nervi used ferrocement to build the central roof of the Turin Exhibition Hall, Salone B. The roof spanned 100 meters without a single interior support column. It still stands today, more than 75 years later. In the 1950s, he built airplane hangars for the Italian Air Force using prefabricated ferrocement panels. He designed the Palazzetto dello Sport for the 1960 Rome Olympics, a domed arena with a sculptural ferrocement ceiling. It holds up thousands of tons of structure. If the material could support Olympic stadiums and cathedral roofs for decades, a backyard water tank was not a technical challenge. It was trivial, and that is exactly what this technology should have been. Trivial, available, standard. Taught in every high school shop class and every extension service bulletin. A cheap, durable, long-lasting way for any family to store thousands of liters of water without depending on a municipal supply. Instead, in the United States, ferrocement water storage became invisible. There is no single reason. But the forces that pushed it aside are consistent. Plastic tank manufacturers grew into a billion-dollar industry. Municipal water utilities built infrastructure that required households to be connected. State water rights laws, particularly in the arid West, made large-scale private water storage legally complicated or outright illegal. Building codes were written around prefabricated tanks with manufacturer certifications, not hand-built structures. A family that can store 10,000 liters of free rainwater does not need to pay a monthly water bill. It does not generate recurring revenue. It is easier to forget a technology than to ban it. Remove it from manuals, leave it out of textbooks. Stock the hardware stores with plastic tanks instead. Within 2 generations, the knowledge fades. But the physics does not fade. And the construction process, once you see it, is almost insultingly simple. Here is how you build one. You start with a site, level ground, ideally near a downspout from your roof, because that is where the water will come from. A 10,000-liter tank takes up roughly the footprint of a small garden shed, about 2.5 meters in diameter. You clear the ground and pour a simple concrete pad as the floor. That pad is reinforced with rebar in a grid pattern. It is given a slight slope toward a drain valve at one edge for cleaning. Next, you build the skeleton. This is where the chicken wire comes in. You form a vertical wall of woven wire mesh, wrapping it around a frame of thin vertical rebar stakes driven into the concrete pad at regular intervals. The wire mesh wraps the rebar cage from floor to ceiling, forming a cylinder. For a 10,000-liter tank, you typically use 2 to 3 layers, combined with a layer of welded wire mesh for additional strength. The result is a rigid cylindrical cage of wire. Now you mix the mortar. Ferrocement mortar is a rich mix. 3 parts clean sand to 1 part Portland cement. Water added slowly until the mixture is the consistency of peanut butter. You do not use gravel. Gravel would prevent the mortar from penetrating the fine wire mesh properly. The mortar needs to flow into every gap. The plastering is done in layers. The first coat is pressed from the outside of the wire cage, forcing the mortar through the mesh. Once that coat is applied, a second person works on the inside, pressing mortar back into the cage from the opposite direction. The 2 sides meet in the middle, locking the wire in a sandwich of cement. You build up the wall thickness gradually, typically to about 4 centimeters total, in 2 or 3 passes over several days. The roof is built similarly, a dome of wire mesh over a light frame, plastered with the same mortar. A small access hatch is built into the top for cleaning and inspection. Inlet and outlet pipes are cast into the wall as you plaster around them. The interior can be finished with a smooth layer of cement plaster for easy cleaning and, if desired, a food-grade waterproof sealer for drinking water use. The entire build takes a family working together about 1 to 2 weekends. The materials cost between $300 and $500 depending on local prices for cement, sand, and wire. No specialized equipment, no contractor, no permit in most areas outside of the restricted states. Once the mortar cures, you have a tank, a thin-shelled, dome-topped, steel-reinforced concrete tank capable of holding 10,000 liters of water. It is earthquake-resistant because the wire mesh allows the structure to flex slightly without cracking. It is frost-resistant if the walls are thick enough and the cistern is buried or bermed. It is rot-proof, fire-proof, insect-proof, and rodent-proof. The The water inside remains at ground temperature year-round, which naturally inhibits bacterial growth. With minimal maintenance, occasional cleaning, and inspection for hairline cracks, the tank will last over 50 years. Some ferrocement tanks built in the early 20th century are still in service today. The roof of an average American home captures enormous volumes of rainwater every year. A 100-square-meter roof in a region receiving 1,000 millimeters of annual rainfall generates 100,000 liters of water. 1/10 of that, stored in a ferrocement cistern, provides months of water independence for a small household. Used carefully with filtration and proper treatment, rainwater from a clean roof and a sealed cistern is safer than most municipal supplies, and free of chlorine, fluoride, and the trace pharmaceuticals that have been documented in urban water systems. In Kenya, Tanzania, India, the Philippines, and rural communities across Latin America, ferrocement tanks are standard infrastructure. NGOs teach the technique to entire villages in week-long workshops. Farmers build their own, families build their own. Children grow up watching their parents mix mortar and plaster wire cages. The technology is not proprietary, it is not patented, it cannot be monopolized. In the United States, the same technology exists in a strange legal gray zone. Federally, there is no law against building a ferrocement water tank. But in Colorado until 2016, storing more than 110 gallons of rainwater was a water rights violation. In Utah, tanks over 2,500 gallons still require registration. In parts of Nevada, rainwater collection is limited to property owners with established rights. Building codes in many municipalities require engineered drawings, permits, and inspections for any water storage structure above a certain capacity. Those requirements can add thousands of dollars to what should be a $500 project. The technology is not banned. It has been made expensive and complicated and obscure, enough to discourage most people from ever attempting it. But the skills are preserved in NGO field manuals, in homesteading forums, in self-published construction guides passed hand to hand among off-grid builders, on YouTube channels watched by rural communities around the world. The information is out there for anyone willing to look for it. A French gardener built the first one in 1867 to hold water for his plants. An Italian engineer used the same material to build a 100-meter span roof in Turin that still stands. And today, across 3 continents, families are building their own water storage for under $500, while Americans pay thousands for plastic tanks that will crack and leak. The rain still falls. The wire is still available at any hardware store. The cement is still sold by the bag. The only thing standing between you and 10,000 liters of free water storage is a weekend, a wheelbarrow, and the knowledge that the law in 46 states says you can.